to welcome the 16th president of MIT, Dr. Susan Hockfield. She will give some remarks and proceed to introduce our keynote speaker, Ms. Donna, Brazile.
Good morning, everybody. I want to thank all of you, this great sea of faces, for coming to join the celebration, this remarkable celebration. As you all know, this is my second experience of the Martin Luther King Jr. breakfast, and I have to tell you, it just takes my breath away. It starts a little early, even for me, and I expect for many of you it even feels a bit earlier than it feels for me. But it wakes me up pretty fast. The spirit of community, the remarkable contributions from our students and staff. It is an inspiring time to get together. As happened last year, I am enormously touched by the words of wisdom from our students, from David Lowery and John Pope. And I'm also deeply touched by the musical offerings we've heard this morning. They are just an extraordinary way to put our minds and our hearts in the spirit of celebration for this morning, so thank you for all of that. And the thing that brings us all together, of course, is to celebrate the life and legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., but we couldn't all get here this morning except for the efforts of lots of people who have organized the events. And I want to thank the Martin Luther King Jr. Day Committee for organizing this year's program. And I also want to draw out special thanks for Dean Leo Osgood, who served as the co-chair of this committee for many, many years. So I want to ask you to join me in thanking all of these people who have helped. Now, as we gather together this morning, it is impossible not to remember the passing just last week of Coretta Scott King. Some of you here probably will remember her speaking at MIT in 1994 at the 20th Martin Luther King Jr. celebration. MIT was honored and I'm sure inspired by her presence and her observations on that occasion, and I know many of you, like I, was enormously moved this morning to see a video of her presentation here on the screen, to see her beautiful face and to hear her stirring words was a very, very moving way to start out this morning. In one sense, Mrs. King's passing marks the end of an era and compels us to reflect on the achievements of a movement that seems ever more remarkable with the passage of time. As we heard in one of the musical selections to her, "You raise me up." And indeed, she has raised all of us up. But there's a second and a more important message that we should draw from this moment. Just as Coretta Scott King carried on the work of civil rights, we must renew our commitment to the ideals Dr. King exemplified. We must shoulder ourselves the burdens of change if we're to build a more inclusive society, a more pluralistic and talented society, a more tolerant society, and in every sense of the word, a more just society. In this respect, Mrs. King herself provided us with a model. In reading the obituaries and the accounts of her life and work, I was particularly struck by the crucial role that Dr. King's death played in catalyzing Mrs. King's own public involvement in his work. In the tragic moment of his death, she knew that she had to take up his work, and so it should be for us. As the generation to which we have looked for guidance leaves the stage, a generation that included leaders like Mrs. King and Judge Constance Baker Motley, we must step up and take up our part. Of course, this is precisely why we gather together each year at this time, to affirm a shared commitment. Because as this year's program recognizes, there is still very, very much to do if we are to accomplish the agenda Dr. King set out for us. In talking about the quest for civil rights, Dr. King often drew on powerful biblical language, especially when he invoked the image of the promised land, a place for which we are bound but have not yet reached. He understood his work as part of a long historic journey. Today, I want to reflect briefly on the ways in which we continue Dr. King's journey as a nation, but more importantly for us here today, as an institution. Our understanding of American life and history has changed immeasurably since Dr. King's lifetime. Since symbols matter and can encapsulate larger changes in society, I'll just mention one that captured my attention recently. Last week, we learned that the Smithsonian Institution had chosen the site for a new museum of African American history and culture. This museum will be built on the National Mall, immediately adjacent to the Washington Monument. Such a museum, without doubt, will be a powerful symbol. But what story will it tell? Will it show us that we've reached Dr. King's goal? We all know full well that it will not, but it cannot. It will show the steps by which progress has been made, incomplete progress, but progress nonetheless. And it will celebrate the individuals whose work has moved us further along on our journey. As a museum, it will tell our history, and by revealing that history, it will inspire each of us to make our own contributions to advance our progress on the journey. Here at MIT, our journey also is not complete. We are not yet where we want to be. Let me step back for a minute and ask a fundamental question. Why would MIT want to follow Dr. King on this great journey? The essential answer, of course, is that we acknowledge individually and as a community the call of justice, the imperatives of fairness and of inclusion. But we also set our course by points on MIT's own unique compass. Let me remind you of two that guide us. First, we have a special responsibility to take a lead in opening education and careers in science and engineering to all those with the interest, the ability, and the commitment to succeed. These are fields that we love, and they are fields in which we lay claim, justifiably, to national and international preeminence. Our actions are watched and our policies become influential. If you doubt our influence, let me assure you that MIT's support of women faculty has transformed the face of science higher education in America. We have a bully pulpit, and it is up to us to use it. This leads me to the second way in which we can influence things for the better beyond our own walls. Let me be honest. In America, we still confront nagging concerns that diverse is equivalent to second rate. But anyone who has experienced MIT knows that this is simply not true. And no other place is better equipped than we are to put that myth to rest. Think of MITES, our simply extraordinary summer program for talented high school juniors from around the country. Think of the SEED Academy, our weekend program from high schoolers from Cambridge and Boston. Think of the STEM program for middle school students. I have met students in these programs, and I have seen for myself their infectious enthusiasm, their intensity, and their excellence. But most of all, think of our own students. MIT proves that raising the bar is not only possible, but it is essential. MIT proves that fighting the tyranny of low expectations is the surest way to enable students, and I mean all of our students, to excel. And MIT proves that diversity and excellence can and should go hand in hand. So now we know where we want to go, but how will we get there? The short answer is by hard work. Let me spend the remainder of my time focusing on some of the initiatives that make me confident that we will get there. After all, no one at MIT is ever afraid of hard work. Dean Marilee Jones has explained to me that she and her colleagues in the admissions office never talk about the undergraduate applicant pool. They refer to it instead as the talent pool, because that's what it really is. Over the last year, this admissions office has redoubled its efforts at recruiting minority applicants. And they're working with community-based organizations and our own alumni to identify top students who might not ordinarily apply to MIT. Their efforts have already led to an increase in applications in both the early and regular admissions cycles. And after acceptance letters go out, Marilee and her colleagues will work with all of our help to ensure that these extraordinary students choose to enroll at MIT. And as we strive toward improvements for those who study here, we also are taking important steps for those who work here. Programs in human resources aim to enhance opportunities for career development for current minority staff through programs such as the Partnership, the YMCA Black Achievers Program, and Conexión. At the same time, to recruit exceptional staff members from minority communities, we've expanded outreach efforts. At last year's breakfast, I acknowledged that we had much to do if we were to bring to MIT and nurture here a diverse graduate student body and a diverse faculty. Since last year, we've begun some important initiatives on both of these critical fronts. The Institute's own faculty has provided impetus for these initiatives through the commitment it made in the spring of 2004 to take a leadership role among our peer institutions in the recruitment and academic success of underrepresented minority faculty and graduate students. Traditionally, it has been harder to make progress in graduate admissions than at the undergraduate level, but we're developing new approaches that stress collaboration between individual departments and the central administration, efforts like the Converge program. I believe these collaborative efforts will provide the ideas, the tools, and the administrative support that our graduate programs need to compete for highly competitive and widely sought-after graduate students. Now, I've talked about undergraduate and graduate students and the staff, but a great university like this one depends critically on its faculty. The provost has recently announced the establishment of 3 new committees that will help us put into action the faculty's own commitment to diversifying its ranks. These efforts will align with the continuing work of the Council on Faculty Diversity. First, we've appointed a new minority faculty recruitment committee. We've asked this group to identify and assess efforts to increase the pool of minority candidates for faculty positions at MIT. Its members will identify the most successful approaches to minority faculty recruitment here and at peer institutions. The committee will recommend to the provost new approaches and will serve as a resource for department heads and deans throughout the institute. In parallel, we've established a committee on the retention of minority faculty so that we can develop a deeper understanding of the experience of minority faculty at the institute. This understanding will lead to the design of new ways to assist and support their career development. Finally, a third committee will review the Martin Luther King Jr. Visiting Professors and Scholars Program. As the provost will certainly has pointed out, this program brings remarkable individuals to MIT. The new committee will look at our experience over the past decade to determine how we can make the program even more successful, both for its participants and for MIT. All 3 of these initiatives reflect Provost Reif's deep personal engagement, and I'm delighted that he has made faculty diversity a top priority so soon after moving into the provost's office. As I describe new programs and our progress for undergraduates, graduate students, faculty, and staff, it must be clear that I certainly do not believe that our journey is complete. There is much to do all across MIT if we are to meet our own highest aspirations as a community. But I believe that we're moving in the right direction. And I believe very deeply that all of us share a vision of our destination. A destination that Dr. King might have called the Promised Land. Thank you. Now, it is my enormous privilege to introduce this morning's keynote speaker. Many of us first learned about Donna Brazile in the year 2000, when she became the first African-American ever to lead a major presidential campaign. But she had been making her mark in politics long before that, with senior positions in numerous presidential campaigns and on Capitol Hill. Ms. Brazile is a native of New Orleans and a graduate of Louisiana State University. She remembers that it was the assassination of Dr. King in 1968 that convinced her to dedicate herself to political and social activism. Today, she chairs the Democratic National Committee's Voting Rights Institute. She holds a position as an adjunct professor at Georgetown University, and she manages her own political consulting firm in Washington. Ms. Brazile is also a frequent contributor and political commentator on CNN's Inside Politics and Crossfire. She's a columnist for Roll Call, the newspaper of Capitol Hill, and a contributing writer for Ms. Magazine. A former fellow at Harvard's Institute of Politics, she presently holds the Senator Winona Lippman Chair in Women's Political Leadership at Rutgers University. Even this very brief summary of her career, and I can tell you, even a very brief conversation over breakfast, demonstrates that Ms. Brazile is a woman of tremendous vision, energy, and accomplishment. Or as one colleague who knows her well said to me, she is a force. Please join me in welcoming Donna Brazile to our campus.
Thank you. Someone left a prayer book, and being a Catholic, I handed it back. Thank you so much, Madam President. Don't you like saying those words, Madam President? I don't know about you, but the polls suggest that we can start practicing that more, so. I've been introduced by presidents, vice presidents, preachers, but I don't think I've ever been introduced by neuroscientists. So I am grateful for that introduction. And it's also a great honor to be back here in Boston and Cambridge. I see the weather hasn't changed much. You know, we Louisianians experience at seasonal changes. We're now entering Mardi Gras. And soon after Mardi Gras, we have crawfish season. And from crawfish season, we go into shrimp season. And we end the year with crab season. So you can imagine I've been stirring up gumbo, jambalaya, Creole etouffee, and anything else I can find these days, since it's hard to get my ingredients from home. I want to bring greetings from my cousin, Margot Randolph. She was a student here. She graduated in 2004. She's now a graduate student at USC. So I want to thank you all for taking care of her, treating her right, and making sure that she still knows how to cook gumbo. My friends, it's always good to be here during Black History Month as we celebrate the achievements of a great people as well as the triumphs. It's also a great time to remind our fellow citizens that the journey to freedom and equality is one that we must recommit ourselves to each and every day. This is also a sad period as we buried just 2 days ago a wonderful great American, Coretta Scott King. Mrs. King once remarked that struggle is a never-ending process. Freedom is never really won. You earned it and you win it in every generation. My friends, we thank God for Coretta Scott King and so many others whose shoulders we have stood on. Her shoulders were sturdy, they were strong. When Martin Luther King died, we looked to Mrs. King for strength and she never disappointed us. She kept the fire of freedom burning, and she never looked back. Mrs. King was also a great friend and mentor. I first met her as a college student when she traveled across the country inspiring young people to take their seats at the table. A year after listening to Mrs. King, I arrived in Washington, D.C. to help work on a committee to make Martin Luther King's birthday a national federal holiday. Throughout those long years of organizing at the grassroots level, it was Mrs. King who not only placed her faith in young people to achieve the goal of collecting signatures, organizing events in states and towns to pass resolutions, she personally adopted many of us as the new heirs to the legacy of the struggle for civil rights and freedom. She challenged us to build a coalition of conscience. She taught us how to love. She taught us to embrace the good in all people. And most of all, she told us to never forget that weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. Mrs. King inspired me personally, and I can tell you today that I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her leadership and her determination. There were times when, at the age of 22, when I was organizing the 20th anniversary of the historic march on Washington, D.C., Mrs. King would often tell Walter Funtroy and Ben Hooks and Joe Lowry and all the other leaders of the civil rights movement, she said, she's young, but she can organize and she can work hard, and you know what? We don't have to pay as much as we pay those guys. But she said, we still have to pay her. I love Mrs. King. I love her spirit and her determination. And the most important thing that we can do now is not just cry and weep and mourn her passing, but to continue her work. I have pledged to help the movement renew the Voting Rights Act of America. There's no more important civil rights law that was passed than the Voting Rights Act. As you all know, it's set to expire next year. And although I wish the president would have said something at the funeral and even in the State of the Union, something that he said to us in private, that he personally will work for its renewal, I wish he would have said it publicly so that the American people would be put on notice that we still need the Voting Rights Act in 2006. I wasn't at the funeral. I'm still Catholic. 45 minutes and out, I have a hard time sitting for 6 hours. If I'm telling too much of my business, I'm sorry, it's the truth. I was able to endure the Rosa Parks funeral because I had a little role in helping to organize it and working on making sure that her body was laid to rest, and also the visit to the Capitol at the Rotunda. That was a very special moment for me personally. I've been in presidential motorcades, vice presidential motorcades. I've never been in a motorcade that a black woman was leading. And my friends, when I got the call to organize it, I said, whoa, I'm still surviving, living through the Katrina moment, but they said, we need your help and your expertise, and I said, okay, I'll do it. My first responsibility was to organize a caravan that would pick Mrs. Parks' body up at the Thurgood Marshall Airport in Baltimore. I called the governor. He's a Republican, but I don't mind. Everybody has a toll-free line. And I said, Governor Ehrlich, I need a favor. And he said, what? It helps that I came up here for a couple of years because Chip DePaula, who also was at Harvard that semester, was his chief of staff, so it wasn't hard to get through to the governor. And I said, well, I need some of your state police. I also need access to the first terminal at BWI. I mean, look, I was putting in all the requests. And I said, while you're at it, can you give me the Maryland Honor Guard? Someone has to carry the casket. Southwest had already provided the airline, and by the way, they did give us more than peanuts, which I loved. I said, you are not going to fly black people from Detroit to Montgomery and to Baltimore on peanuts. We need something. And so as we got in that motorcade, and the first time in my life, as we drove up BWI, from BWI to Washington, D.C., we came into the nation's capital around what I call the back roads. We went through Southeast Washington, the poorest area in our region. And there, at 7 o'clock at night, a cold winter night, people were lined up with their children outside to wave goodbye to Rosa Parks. My friends, like Coretta Scott King, we owe so much to so many who spent their lives dedicated to champion freedom and justice and equality for all of us. And it's fitting now that we continue to spread the gospel of peace and love and mercy and justice. There's no need to be silent when there's so much pain, so much that still divide us in this country. As many of you know, I am and always will be a native New Orleanian and proud of it. I was born, like my other siblings, all 9 of us, at Charity Hospital. My mother was born at Charity Hospital. My mother died at Charity Hospital. Like many of us, those of us who were born there, we were born there because we had no health insurance and we had no money. And when I saw the pictures, after spending days and hours warning my family, as I do every hurricane season, my friends, if you ever wanted to practice your faith, then you go home during a hurricane season. That is a testament of faith. See, I'll never forget my childhood on September 9th, 1965. I can almost tell you the hour, because it was like a scene out of The Wizard of Oz, which, by the way, I thought was a scary movie when I was a child. Dorothy ain't had nothing on me, but I was scared like her. I said, "Where's Toto? I need him too." My friends, Hurricane Betsy destroyed our home and flooded our city and our community, and I'll never forget my grandmother, Frances, from Mississippi. She would not go. And my daddy, after the house was blowing apart, my daddy said, "Mama, you gotta come." He carried us all to the house next door, which seemed to be a lot stronger than our home. And Grandma would not leave. She stayed, and she watched out the window. The next morning, when the storm had passed and we walked around to our house looking for our grandma, we feared the worst. But as our faith would tell us, she prayed, she watched, she survived. The only part of the house that was still intact was the room where Grandma sat in her rocking chair. Now, I tell you, oh yeah, she was a fierce woman. I may be a force, but she was fierce. When I called my dad and said, "Please go with Chet, my brother," he was on his way to Houston, my dad said, "You know, I'm too old to run from God. I've been in every storm, and this one is no different than the others." I couldn't tell him anything else. What could I say? I had a credit card. I had cash. In fact, my father had cash. It's all in his walls. Trust me, you ever see anything about money laundering? After Katrina, that's all he did. Went back in the wall to get all his money. It all had to be washed. My daddy wouldn't go. And because he's a diabetic, my sister, who's a nurse, and her husband and child, they wanted to stay with him. We have what we call in New Orleans a shotgun, but it's a double shotgun with a Camelback. Well, that's some special architecture. And I hope they rebuild it. My sister Cheryl said, "I'm not worried it's going to hit the West Bank, not the East Bank, so you just don't worry about me." Faith. My sister Sheila, who lived in an assisted living facility, well, my friends, my dad said she has to stay. They would not evacuate them because of state rules. We could not pull her out of that facility. And so my sister Lisa, who worked at a hospital, 2 shifts, she said she couldn't go because she was on call. Her 2 small children were taken and brought to safety in Arkansas by my oldest niece. Jeffrey, her fiance, went to pick up his grandparents. They said, "Take our car, it's much bigger, and you go ahead and you get as many kids as possible off the block and keep going." Jeffrey never saw his grandparents again. They perished in that storm. So many old people in New Orleans gave their keys and their cash, and they said to the young people, you go, we've lived through this, we can hang. My friends, it took me 6 days to get my father out of that storm. 6 days, 12 feet of water, no contact. He was down to 4 slices of bread. And when I finally reached him, he was in San Antonio, Texas. I said, now how did you get to Texas? This is a man that I kept begging all throughout the years, please come to Washington, D.C., too cold. Please go to New York to see your sister. I don't want to go to New York. I couldn't get him to go anywhere. So that night he told me when I was so it was so joyful to hear his voice, he said, I've left the state now twice. Once to Korea, now to San Antonio. He said, both times the government picked up the tab, Donna. Many of my other relatives, like my father, many of them were taken to places unknown. Some of them just wanted to come back home, didn't care what the situation. Today, as I stand before you, my aunts and my uncles, my brothers, my sisters are scattered in 8 states and 14 cities. In order to keep up with them and to communicate, I have to pull out an Excel sheet because they're still on the run from the worst storm of all, and that's the storm of indifference. Hurricane Katrina and her equally vicious, nasty cousin, Rita, were equal opportunity destroyers. They showed us that nature wreaks havoc with impartiality. Hurricanes Katrina dramatic winds destroyed beautiful lakefront homes, Gulf Coast mansions, profitable casinos, with the same gale force that wiped out shotgun houses, public housing apartments, what some of the poorest Americans call home. Unfortunately, while nature may treat us all equally, Katrina and Rita showed us that society does not. Our country still has enormous problems with racial and economic inequality that are too easily brushed aside when the next news cycle roll in. Now more than ever, we must have a frank conversation about what it means to be poor in America and what we can do to alleviate the pain and suffering of our citizens who sometimes work 2 and 3 minimum wage jobs to make ends meet. You know, my friends, I have to calculate every time the President of the United States get up and give a State of the Union speech. And I look to see how much time is spent on some of the most important topics of the day. The President spent 46 seconds on Katrina and the Gulf Coast. That was less time than was spent introducing him and the applause. 1 million American citizens dispersed, 80,000 small businesses destroyed, 200,000 homes destroyed, 46 seconds. You know I've called the White House and reported my outrage. Oh, I'm not scared of anybody but God. And I called Carl Rove, he called me back. I tracked him down. All weekend, I don't care about the Super Bowl, I care about Katrina. I know the Steelers are going to win, they're favored. That's why I was trying to root for both teams. I said, Carl, you got to call me back. You can't leave us stuck. And yet, my friends, that's how many of our people, they feel stuck. They feel stuck, as if they're still back in the eye of the storm. They're stuck in the same neighborhoods where they experienced those storms before. They're stuck sometimes in attics with no ventilation. They feel stuck on rooftops with signs when Air Force One is flying over saying, help us, bring us water. My sister Lisa, who was in a garage, said she heard that plane fly over. And she said nobody even dropped water. They dropped water everywhere else in the world, but why didn't they give us water? 4 days of heat and humidity and no water. My friends, None of us will ever forget the horrific images from New Orleans, babies dying in their mother's arms from dehydration. Corpse, my daddy counted 2, 3. He said it was worse than Korea because at night you heard the cries of people. There was nothing you could do with snakes and gators and everything else in the water. He said there was nothing he could do but cry. I never saw my father cry after his mother died, or even my mother passed away. He cried when Katrina struck because he felt that he was abandoned. He gave 18 months in the hills of Korea to save and to defend his country, but yet for 4 days he could not get anyone to stop to pick him up. Every time I think about Katrina and those hours and days, I get upset. And the only reason why I can still smile is because I'm grateful, like many of us from the Gulf Coast, to the American people for your generosity, your kindness, your compassion, for taking us in, for sending us clothes, for giving us cash, and for making phone calls after phone calls to check on us to make sure we were okay. Perhaps the most important thing you gave us during that whole time was your prayers. Because without those prayers, many more would have died. As it stands, over 1,100 Louisianians, 1,300 from the Gulf Coast are known dead, with 1,000 more still missing, many elderly, and a lot more children than even the media will tell you. And now I'll tell you, there's a lot that's been done, and a lot more that can be done. When I sat with the president on December 7th, I sat down with George Bush. It was an interesting affair. I was with Dorothy Height, the National Council of Negro Women, Bruce Gordon, new head of the NAACP, my former mayor, Mark Morial, the National Urban League, Patrick Swagger, the president of Howard University, Deborah Lee, who's the president of BET, and Dr. William Shaw, the president of the National Baptist Convention. And so the president had me to his far left, but that was all right. That's pretty where I stand on the political scale. When my time came, I said to the president, I said, Mr. President, you'll be a hero if you rebuilt those levees. After all, they're federal levees. When I was a little girl, you could tell how much money your family had by where you're born. I was born behind not one, but 2 sets of train tracks, so that was a good indication that we were poor. But I was also born right smack up against the Mississippi River. To this day, I worship that river. But I spent most of my time on that levee to see just how high the water would rise before we had to what? Get out. Get moving. We lived in the bowl. You ever lived in the bowl? It's knowing that to your back is the river, and in front of you is that huge, massive lake called Pontchartrain, and on both sides of you, you have a swamp or a ditch. That's the bowl. Every day it rained, we had waterfront property. So when I told the president that he had to build those levees stronger, look, I've been to Venice, I've been to the Netherlands, I know you can build levees. Don't tell me you cannot build levees. But you got to have the will and you got to put some money. And for all of you addicted people to oil, as the president said just recently, I'm probably addicted to. Let me just say this. We give this country so much of our natural resources in Louisiana, our region. All of the petrochemical industries are down there, pumping each and every day, hundreds of thousands of gallons of crude oil. And yet, when we ask the federal government, just give us a little bit back like you give Florida and California and Texas, they say, oh, no, 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 no. There's a reason why there's so much poverty and despair in the Gulf Coast. We can't even get our fair share of natural resources that we produce in this country. And it's upsetting. When we ask the federal government just to give us back what we produce, they'll say, oh, well, we have to think about it. My friends, why do you have to think? Katrina showed America that there's still poverty in our midst. I didn't need Katrina to tell me that. But my friends, we now know it, and we can't close our eyes. Louis Armstrong, I listen to Louis Armstrong all the time. He has a wonderful song, Do You Know What It Means to Miss New Orleans? I played like my daddy used to play the platters, around the clock. When I get in my car today, I'm going to play it again. It's like an anthem. We miss New Orleans. We miss the music. We miss the language. We miss the architecture. We miss the food. Most importantly, we miss the people. Where you at? How you doing? What you cooking today? See you later, right? We always answer ourselves. My friends, most of all, the wounds. And I only speak as a native daughter, but I have to hear my brothers and sisters cry every day. The wounds that's been inflicted on a people, my friends, is so damaging. The wounds are not just physical wounds of being away from your home. They're now spiritual wounds, of being told that we've done enough and that we can't do much more. That's not true. A budget of $2.7 trillion. And we talk about King and Mrs. King. And I think about what Dr. King stood for, what he died for, the march that he was on in the last days of his life. A march for economic justice, a poor people's campaign. And look at that budget. Take a deep look at that budget and say to yourself, is this budget going to lift one more child out of poverty? Will this budget save one more American from losing his or her health insurance? Will this budget keep us on track of being a great nation? And sadly, my friends, I must tell you, this budget will do nothing to ease the pain and suffering of those who already have too little in our society. And that's a bad budget, and it's immoral, and it's not worth the paper it's printed on. And if I get a chance to tell them again, I'm going to say it because it's wrong, and we should tell our leaders. And I'm going to tell you something about Washington. I'm so glad I'm not there right now. Now, you all know I love what I do. Otherwise, I wouldn't do it. I'll just be a chef. I stir up anything. Stir y'all up if y'all give me a moment. I like the Braziles. I'll be in good service to somebody doing something worthwhile. But I enjoy what I do because I get a chance every day to speak truth to power. So like Joe Lowry on that stage the other day telling everybody what he thought. And they say, well, that wasn't politically correct. Well, that was in the Baptist tradition. And he did the right thing. Some people may not like it, but you know what? Tough. My friends, we got to tell them that this budget is wrong. Our country is moving in the wrong direction, and we need a course correction. That's why some of us are counting the days, 273 to the 2006 election, and 999 to the 2008 election. Washington, D.C. has gotten so bad, it's just downright disrespectful. Nobody respects each other. No one can communicate. One party controls everything. The other party is still trying to figure out who they are and what they stand for. Sometimes I believe they all need a spinal transplant. Oh, my best one is when they come in the room and tell us, oh, well, you know, the reason why we couldn't fight that budget cut is because we were not in the room. What you mean? You got a key. You got an ID. You can get into the room. You just don't want to knock down the door. That's leadership. If you and I had the ability, because we had a key and we had an ID, to get in the house, and then we heard that around the corner, through that door, they're now figuring out our nation's priorities as it relates to the budget, as it relates to higher education, as it relates to our social net programs. And you mean to tell me you're going to complain and whine that you couldn't get in? Go knock it down. And by the way, call CNN, we'll cover it, and if you're smart enough, you'll get arrested. At least the people know. that you stood for something. What did you accomplish this year? Well, I got arrested because I was trying to stop $12.1 billion from being cut from student loans program. I got arrested because I was trying to prohibit another $1.7 trillion in tax cuts to the wealthy. I got arrested, my friends, because I tried to raise the minimum wage for the first time in almost 8 years. Would somebody please get arrested for doing something in America again? I believe we owe it to the victims of Hurricane Katrina and Rita to once again summon this nation to eradicate poverty in our lifetime. We owe it to them to fight for justice and to end racism once and for all. We owe it to all of those victims who were stranded and left behind to continue to wage the fight on their behalf. And so, my friends, for those of you and others who may be suffering Katrina fatigue, get over it. Get over it until we rebuild the Gulf Coast. And once again, our people are able to go back home. Race defines so much of what we do in America, but it should never define the government response to people who are suffering. Race is what placed so many victims in the lower parishes in the first place. Race is what kept so many people without having the means to go and leave. Some people had no way of leaving. They had no cars. They had no transportation. And unfortunately, my friends, Katrina struck at the end of the month. And for many poor Americans, as I had to tell Bill Clinton, President Clinton called me, Donna, what can I do? I said, President, first of all, you know it's the end of the month. You know how poor people live? They live from paycheck to paycheck. And at the end of the month, what do? They blow the last $4 because they know they're going to get their check at the first of the month. So I said, Mr. President, you could do two things. One, make sure you tell Walmart and Walgreens and CVS to give out the medicine because the people, unfortunately, the Red Cross don't carry what they need. They need their high blood pressure medicine. They need the diabetes medicine. They need the medicine, not drugs. They need their medicine. I said, the second thing you could do, Mr. President, you can tell whoever have ice and water to please just drop it off. Don't let people die from dehydration in America. I was out of my mind when I was telling this to the president. And I said, Mr. President, every time I go and try to get a money order or wire money home, I have to spend half my money wiring it home. I said, now, Mr. President, the electricity's off, so they can't get to their ATM, my friends. I said, so they need money. When my brother Kevin started leaving New Orleans and heading west toward Lake Charles, he stopped there. Here come Rita. He had to go somewhere else. He's in Columbia, South Carolina. I thought he would come to D.C., but he said it's too cold. But my friends, we had to break it on down. I volunteered to be a translator for FEMA, Federal Employees Missing in Action. They didn't take me up, but I volunteered. My sister, who had to go on national TV, I had to finally comb my hair after 7 days and say, you know, it's really something. I had a do-rag on. Some of you women know what I'm talking about. It was one of those moments. I got fed up. This is when someone told me on Sunday, a week after the storm had passed. I had finally heard from my sister Lisa, my brothers, my sister Cheryl, my dad. I put my dad in a hotel. I sent $300 for him to eat and make phone calls. My dad said, oh, I just want to go make groceries. I'm like, the food is okay in the hotel. No, I want to go make my own groceries. I mean, he's in the Homewood Suite, you know, trying to make some jambalaya out there in San Antonio. And so when I was finally heard, I said, Lord, please, my sister Sheila. She had brain surgery. She had a tumor. She needed help. When I last talked to Sheila, I said, don't go nowhere, Sheila. Stay there. Somebody will come and get you. I said, fill your bathtub with water. Keep your candles burning. Take your medicine, Sheila. I said, but somebody will come and get you. When I called, I had to filed with the International Red Cross. I did everything I was told. I was being a good, compliant person. I have computers, I have friends. I had everyone helping me, sending clothes, sending money. Everybody was in the groove. We were being FEMA and Red Cross. But Sheila had to get out of that assisted living facility. And they told me to my face that that was not a priority. They said, we got to get the people out the Superdome and the people at the convention center, I'm sure because they were making too much noise. And they didn't like the pictures that were being sent all over the world, which then gave us the response from Fidel Castro and the French government and others that we'll send help. They didn't want that. They said, no, no, no. But when they told me that people who were in nursing homes, people who were in mental facilities, people who were in public housing projects and senior citizen home were not a priority, I got angry. And when I get angry, I'm not one of those that throw things at anybody. I take action. I comb my hair, put on some makeup, and I went to CNN and I said, Wolf, I need 5 minutes. You see, you never make a black woman mad. Or for that matter, any woman. I speak for myself because I know some women don't want to be caught up in the emotional turmoil, but I felt at that moment I had to stand up for Sheila. And I did. Within 1 hour of going on national TV, giving out her address, 3933 Tulane Avenue. I said, the last time we checked, they were still under 12 feet of water. She cannot swim, and I'm sure she will not do anything. But wait, as I told her to do. I have not been able to communicate with her because, like my father and others, she has no cell phone, and she has no cash and no credit card. She's in a facility, and she needs help. Please send somebody to go and get my sister. I was very calm, very, very, very calm. When I got home that afternoon, Tim Russert called me, some other reporters called me and said, we are making calls, we're calling our camera crews, blah, blah, blah. Within 1 hour, I had a phone call from the Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries. Now, when I was growing up, nobody ever called you from Wildlife and Fisheries. I mean, that's like, you got a turtle in your backyard, Wildlife and Fishery. A crocodile left the bayou and came into your backyard, Wildlife and Fishery. But Wildlife and Fishery in New Orleans, whoa, I said, okay. We found your sister, she's alive. She's one of 6 people alive. They said, but she won't come with us. And I said, oh, I was so grateful to God that Sheila was alive. I called all my other siblings and my brother Chet, who was within a 30-mile radius. We set up radius so that everybody knew where the point. You had to go somewhere, check in. We gave you clothes and money, and that's how we took care of our family. Chet went with my cousin, who's a New Orleans police officer, because she wouldn't go with anybody. I told her somebody would come and get her, and she went with Chet. I just wanted to share that story with you because it was not easy, my friends. I have access. I could pick up the phone and call President Clinton, Vice President Gore. I even offered Gore $500 because he was going in and out with a plane. I said, go get $500 in Louisiana is a lot of money. I said, get somebody $500, they go get my family. I was down to bargain. I wanted my family out of that water. Since Katrina, some of my family has fallen back on hard times using their modest savings and their assets to survive in strange places while they await promising news from their insurance companies or FEMA. My sister Lisa has returned to New Orleans, the only one. She's moved into a trailer. She's ripped out the mold in her red-tagged home. She's thrown out all of her belongings, and now she's waiting for FEMA to deliver a blue tarp to patch up her roof. She still doesn't know whether she can rebuild or whether enough people will return in order to justify their neighborhood restarting all over. Like so many others, her life is on hold. She's in limbo, waiting until someone give her the plan. In a couple of weeks, some New Orleanians will return home to celebrate the 150th anniversary of Mardi Gras. I'm torn. How can I go back when my family is unable to go home? Perhaps I'll find other ways of celebrating this wonderful Mardi Gras season. I must tell you, my friends, that when the debris is cleared, when the mud is finally removed and we're ready to start over, we must make sure that we rebuild our great city and region in a way that lifts people up and close our great divides. Dr. King once remarked that we must decide whether we walk in the light of creative altruism or in the darkness of destructive selfishness. Life's most persistent and nagging question is, what are you doing for others? I believe that it's time that we recommit ourselves to helping our fellow citizens, not only those who are struck by natural disasters, but those who face the daily disaster of living in poverty in our great land. This is a great country. I know that. This is a country that took a child that was born into poverty and allowed her to live out her dream to pick a president. When I was a little girl, I didn't want to play Barbie. I didn't want paper dolls. I told my mother I didn't want to marry a prince or be a princess. I wanted to pick a president. And I spent my whole life, 7 presidential campaigns, 56 congressional campaigns, 19 state and local campaigns, 46 states, 4 more states. I'll be Miss USA without the bikini. The one thing that I dream of and I will continue to work for as a child of the Deep South is a day that we can all come together. I am grateful to have so many friends who help my family, black and white alike. Katrina, Rita, they didn't care about your color. They took you out no matter who you are and what hill you lived on or what street you called home. I'm grateful that so many Americans reached out and gave us a place, a dry place to call home. But I want more than just empty promises and rhetoric and a long speech. I want all of you today to find some way to help those who are still hurting and to find some way to give back. The Bible says, to whom much is given, much is required. Don't wait for the government, don't wait for the president or vice president or any member of Congress to tell you what you know in your heart is the right thing to do. If you believe in justice, if you believe that Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King serve a greater cause and a more noble cause, then give back and help lift someone up. I leave this day in this program committed to keeping the fire of freedom burning. The march has not ended. And to all of the young people in this room, to David and to John and so many other promising graduates, the world awaits your leadership. The world awaits your time to serve. This is your moment, and it is your turn to help this nation realize its dreams and its goals so that all of us can walk together as brothers and sisters in peace. Let us all work together to create that beloved community. Let us all complete the journey for freedom, hope, and dignity for all. Thank you for having me. God bless you, and God bless this great institution. Thank you.